This is the ASTRA Primursa, also known as the Space Bear. This is the final design of a custom chapter I've spent over 6 months carefully and painstakingly perfecting to my own tastes. And this video is me taking you through that process. The reason this whole journey started is because I've been getting back into the hobby, as you know, have been falling in love with it, and I used to collect blood angels. But I didn't want to do blood angels again, not only because I don't like repeating myself, but because one of the major things I've really fallen in love with getting back into the hobby again is the conversion, the customizing, and the micro sculpting. Over 6 months ago, I decided to start designing a custom army, and I didn't know what it would be. I think I was going for a very specific tone. In fact, the easiest way to summarize it would be Hound from Game of Thrones. And I guess I sort of figured once I came across the perfect design and approach for me, I might bite the bullet. Really, I just wanted to sculpt some custom stuff, specifically some furs and cloth. That's the sort of thing I find really appealing when it's done well. And this was a really simplistic approach, so it wasn't really super well done or cleaned up. And then also using custom bits, which at this time I began an obsession of finding websites that sold random bits and pieces that I could customize characters with. And the sword and the claw, and actually the head, which I sculpted the hair onto, all come from Puppets War. So I'd started off by just sort of cleaning up the armor, sculpting a few pieces of cloth, and then using Milliput to sculpt the fur boots and the fur cloak. So this is the end paint job, which I was really happy with, and I felt like it had a bit of that grit, especially with the dirt and dust around the legs and the bottom of the cloak. It was also my first time working with tufts and painting a mini that I customized so heavily and used custom bits on. It was really satisfying and definitely made me feel like, okay, I may want to do a lot of this. But as satisfied as I was with this so far, it didn't feel like it had an identity for a Space Marine chapter. I don't feel like it had enough personality. I'm also aware, after having collected a several thousand points Blood Angels army, that when you spend a lot of money on troops over time and a lot of time painting them, it's a big commitment, and I didn't want to hastily just decide to go into the first direction that I played with. So it was time then to play with a few different directions and see where I gravitated towards. So next I actually sculpted 2 custom Space Marines at the same time. Reason being is it gave me an immediate motivation to do something different on both models. So on the first of the 2, I used custom shoulder pads, again from Puppets War, and I went in a much more regal direction. It was clear to me at this point that I was playing with the idea of space bears, because my first model felt pretty bearish, which I really liked, but I also didn't want them to feel too associated with space wolves. I really wanted to make a chapter that feels different. Now, I started working in a bit of a brown color scheme with this model, and brown felt too brown. In fact, you can see with my first base coat, with the brown armor and the brown clothy loiny things, and then the red cloaks, everything started to feel a bit too muddy. So then when I went ahead and painted, I actually went with a much lighter coat, ended up with a cream. And I really did quite like this cream armor aesthetic, especially with the red, but in combination with the gold and the armor style, I felt like it looked a bit too regal, like I lost a bit of that grit, which I definitely wanted to have in the chapter. It's at this stage in my journey that I was also getting really into Zat's Kagoon. There he is. He's one of the first guys that comes up when you look up how to paint grimdark stuff. So I didn't want to lose that grimdark aesthetic that I was getting really into and re-immersing myself into Warhammer. And I also was starting to shape the idea of what the Space Bears chapter would feel like. And I wanted them to really feel serious and gritty and cool, but not be too serious, because, as I've mentioned many times, under the surface there's just a lot of bear puns and it's a bit goofy, which is me not taking it too seriously. So that was one of the 2 that I was working on at about the same time, and I did the paint job of this one first. But the next one, like I said, I was sculpting different things on these 2 models because I was working on them at the same time and wanted to try different things for each one. And this one, I went a little bit more standard in terms of the aesthetic of the armor. I didn't change the shoulder pads. I basically just sculpted a sort of surcoat that hung out from the bottom and a big sort of fur hood over his shoulders. I also felt that with my previous attempts, I'd leaned in one direction very heavily with my color scheme. And I actually got some helpful advice from Darren Latham, an amazing mini painter and sculptor. And he gave some really great painting tips and color mixing tips that I used in painting this model, which actually at this point, and I'd spent a lot of time and care on this model, had ended up being my best paint job so far, which was really encouraging, really fun. And it was the first time I'd actually tried proper edge highlighting all around the model, and I really love the end result. And it was definitely worth trying something in a different direction to my instincts, because I think it's really important to do that to see if your instincts are where you end up wanting to go. Sometimes you can surprise yourself. In this case, I did feel like it was a little too close to the Space Wolf. So I needed to find some different ways to use the things about these two experimental models that I loved, but also find ways to make what I was looking for happen. So next was my fourth Space Marine design. Now, I actually had no sign of settling on anything anytime soon, and I have not been rushing this process, because like I said, I want to commit, I want to do something really special. And in fact, I'm inspired by seeing people do big projects of, in particular, one of the biggest inspirations and motivations for me doing this was the Instagrammer Thunder Wolfen. He created a chapter called The Soul Haunters, and it's a very heavily customized and sculpted Space Marine army, which is just so cool. It's so well done. It's exactly that tone that I love, and honestly had given me a huge amount of inspiration and motivation in me doing this custom army for myself. So design 4, I took the things I liked most about 2 and 3 and tried to put them into one model. I loved the Puppets War shoulder pads. So Space Marine number 4 used those shoulder pads from Puppets War. The cloak around the shoulders I really loved on the first character, but on these big bulky shoulders they couldn't hang over the edges. So it ended up being a sort of mound, almost a hood around the back of the Space Marine's head, connected by a chain that I put on both sides, and this ended up being one of my favorite things, and I feel like really adds to the silhouette of the Space Bear. It's at this stage that I'm really settling on the fact that I want them to feel like bears, like big, and if you see them charging at you, you know you're in big trouble. Now, I'd already been sort of aiding this by customizing the bases to sort of build up with the cork and the layers of sort of rock and things to make the characters look taller on the battlefield. But in this model number 4, I really started to widen and bulk out that Space Marine, really thicken the silhouette. And I tried to aid this in multiple ways by adding the hanging cloths and leathers from his waist and wrapping chains around his waist to thicken his torso. But something felt wrong, and when I did the base coat, it stood out to me. It was the head. Everything was bulked out and like thick and beefy, but the head is that new Primaris Space Marine head. It's got a bit of a V-taper, meaning sort of from the top of the ears and down to the bottom of the chin, it looks like it's narrowing out, which actually makes the face look kind of slender. They gotta be bulky, man. Like they gotta be big boys. Now, I had on the previous model, did a custom snout that I mucked around with, and I really liked the idea, and I wanted to play around with the idea of taking that even further and using the old Space Marine head, the ones that are really squat and have those big flat front faceplate things and the tubes running along the side, and sculpt the snout on that to look as bearish as possible. And just doing that and putting it in place immediately captured the aesthetic that I was feeling. Using the things I'd learned from my previous iterations, but also following my gut, I ended up with a color scheme with red in the shoulder pads and highlights, and then by going with the cream armor, but then also mixing in browns and golds throughout the rest of the armor, I felt like I got an aesthetic I was really happy with. There was just one more thing I had to try, and that was one of those things that I had seen done a lot in Zatskagoon's videos, which is using an enamel-based sort of wash, I guess I'll call it, streaking grime. I gave it a go, and my God, am I glad I did. I fell in love with streaking grime, especially for what I was after with this chapter. So here's a bit of a before and after with the clean model fully painted minus the streaking grime next to the model with the streaking grime applied. And again, this is really my personal taste and something I'm going after aesthetic wise. So some of you might see this and prefer the clean look, but I loved how it really tied it all in together and created that really grungy, serious tone. And then with some snow flecked over top of the character, I was certainly getting to a place I was very happy with. In fact, after this model, I felt like I'd found it. I was like, I found my chapter design and color scheme. So I started to move forward fairly confidently on the basis that that was my finished design and finished color scheme. But it wasn't. There were some pretty substantial discoveries and changes, which I want to get to in a moment. Now, before I get to that, I'm very excited to share a new sponsor that the channel has that I'm really excited about. Now, as you can tell, I love going through this iterative process to discover the best things for me. And in fact, because I've been taking photos of this whole process, you can see how the tools I've been using have been changing. In my first model, I was using an Army Painter wet palette, and it was my first time ever using Kolinsky Sable brushes. As I got further along, I tried the Star wet palette. I also bought a bunch of the Cobalt Keep handles, which actually I discovered through a sponsored segment on Miniac's channel. So it just goes to show you find cool stuff when there are great sponsors on channels. And I'm really excited that the tools that I most fell in love with are what I'm getting to share with you as the sponsor of this video. Redgrass Games, and those of you who have been in the hobby for a while know who they are and know they're great. But those of you who are new to the hobby or re-emerging yourself in the hobby like I have been will be surprised how much of a difference a wet palette will make to your experience. It was the Redgrass Games wet palette that nailed it. Really professionally made, sleek design, really nice to use. It's got a magnetized sort of dimple cup holder that you can use for some of your metallics or washes that you don't necessarily want to put in your wet palette. The hydration system is so much better than just a normal sponge. It holds water, and the hydration paper sheets for the two sizes of wet palettes have been specifically designed so that they keep the paint that you're using in the state that it's in, and your paints for your mini projects can last days, if not weeks. And I have used mine with the paint lasting for weeks. Another amazing discovery and thing they make is their painting handle, which comes with several caps that you can swap out, which makes batch painting super easy. It has a lot of really amazing little hidden features too. The fact that you can rotate really comfortable. Simply use the putty that they send with the caps, apply your mini to the putty, and then you can rotate your mini as you paint them, having access to the whole mini as you're holding your hand comfortably. And another thing is it's magnetized, and they come with magnetic plates. It just gives you so much confidence when you're painting to know that if you accidentally knock your model or your stand, there's a greater likelihood that they're gonna be alive or stand up and not be knocked over if you're a little bit clumsy like me. So check out Redgrass Games. There's a link in the description both for the rotating painting handle with the magnetic base and for the amazing wet palettes. They do two sizes of wet palettes. They're both incredible. I highly recommend them. And I'm super grateful they've sponsored the channel. So it was time to move on to what I thought was my army. I sculpted my first squad. Now I'd already made a few minor changes, one of which was the Puppets War shoulder pads that I use come in two sizes. And so far I'd actually only been using the extra large, and they look super bulky and super cool, but I'm making my first squad and they're just salt intercessors, and I wanted to make sure I'm creating somewhere to go. So I used the large, the normal size ones, and I'm saving the extra large for sort of commanders or veteran types or bulkier warriors. And I also removed the sculpting of the fur boots, again for the same reason. I wanted somewhere to go. I want more customization to come along as I go through the different troops and get bulkier and get cooler and tougher. So the assault intercessors from the Indomitus box were going to be my baseline of what makes a space bear a space bear. And I started to get in the process of batch painting my Marines. And after I'd done the base coat, the zenithal, and done the cream base coat on all of the models, I realized pretty quickly that maybe I wasn't 100% certain. So to be 100% certain, I was just going to paint one of them. So I chose to paint the captain of this group. But after the base coat, it just didn't feel right. I'd done the same armor color, the same base colors and everything. I thought, look, maybe it'll be fixed up when I add the grit and the grimdark aesthetic and the snow, but as a baseline, it wasn't sitting well with me. And I decided that it was where my eye was being directed. Looking at the base model that I'd painted, I kept getting pulled down, away from where I wanted to look, which is the shoulders and the face. Now, that may have been worsened by the fact that it's a very black area inside that hood. He's got lots of grizzly hair and beard, but I actually decided it was the cream armor that was causing the problem. And with the prototype that I'd made, I was really happy with. If you go back and look, there's actually not a lot of cream armor visible, and where it is visible, it's mostly at the top of the sculpture, the character. Brown boots were very muddied and covered in fur. There was lots of leather hanging around the place. So at the end of the day, the cream was only just in the arms and face. So the eye was being directed exactly where it was meant to go. And this was discouraging for me because it felt like I was right back to the drawing board, but I decided to go back to the drawing board without all the miniature painting. So to do this, I used Photoshop and I carefully colored in all the different areas of the model. Now this was a really helpful and useful experience to pick color scheme combinations that I felt worked. And I actually tried dozens of them before I settled on a few that I quite like, and then eventually one. Now I won't have time in this video to go into how I did that, but if you find that interesting as far as picking your color scheme of your Space Marine armies without putting paint on a lot of minis like I have done so far, let me know, because I could make a video on how to do that quite simply with Photoshop or Critter, to use clipping masks and color overlays and various overlay effects to pick your army or chapter color design in a lot less time and a lot more certainty. So it's great being able to see all those things in context, and in the end what I settled on was dark charcoal or black armor and a slightly lighter but still dark grey head, so that the eye would be drawn to the gold and red shoulders, the chains, and the fur around the collar. Now this was again just a digital decision. I needed to see it in person, so it was time to repaint my captain. Everything else had been painted well, I just had to go in and repaint the armor plates themselves. And I felt this was instantly so much better. Now again, this is personal taste. Some people will like the cream aesthetic better, but this gave me a lot more to work with artistically as well. I actually got to muck around with a little bit of non-metallic metal. I got to create more contrast and areas of attention in the paint job of the armor. And overall, I was really happy with the result. It took a little bit of negotiating with the face and the hair, which I recolored a few times until I got the end result you'll see later, mainly because it is so dark and there is a lot of hair and grit sort of pulling the eye around and making it feel a bit messy. So I decided that I wouldn't settle on it as a certainty until I painted a normal Space Marine with a normal Space Bear helmet. So I painted one of the ASTRA Primursa from start to finish up to the same stage that the captain was painted at. When I got my base colors down, I started to feel a little bit uncertain about the helmet, so I just slapped on a coat of red paint to see if maybe the red helmet and red shoulders would work. I didn't like it, so I painted it back to the gray. I should have just done that one in Photoshop. In the end, loved the base coat, needed to decide the eye color. Previously, I had gone with a red, mainly because obviously I'm clearly very drawn to red, but I actually decided to go with blue. A little bit of that iciness in the eyes and power weapons I thought would add quite a lot. So I had two base coated models with color schemes I was happy with. It was time to add those finishing touches and see if I could call it complete. The first of those two finishing touches, of course, being the streaking grime. Basically, it's an enamel paint, so it doesn't come off or react to water in the way that acrylic paint does, but it does react to alcohol. So by giving both models a very generous spraying with the airbrush of the streaking grime, and then using first a woolly dauber and then eventually some cotton buds, slowly applying and dabbing on that isopropyl alcohol. And you can see this has such an immediate effect and really does what I want it to. Specifically, it ties everything all in together with that same sort of grit, ages it all and makes it all feel so ancient and epic and powerful and gritty and grimdark, and it's all the things I wanted a Space Bear to feel like. Now you do lose some of those sharper details, so I did go in and repaint the eyes and a few of the bits that needed a little extra highlight. And with that done, the second of the two final finishing touches is the snow. I do this step specifically with the Citadel Valhallan Blizzard effects paint. It's sort of like this clumpy, white, goopy stuff that you paint on, and when it dries it looks like really cool and snowy. And I apply it with a really old, really janky brush, just so it applies pretty unevenly and in little chunks and spreads it a bit. And then I also use that to fairly roughly and haphazardly apply a little bit of snow on the upper areas of the model. Now, as I've been developing the visual design of the Space Bears, I'd also been working on the lore and how the chapter feels and their history. And the ASTRA Primursa literally hibernate. The hallmark of the ASTRA Primursa, more than any chapter in Warhammer, is patience. They are willing to wait for the right time to strike and complete the missions at any cost. So I loved creating an aesthetic with these characters where they look like they're coming out of hibernation, emerging from a cave. And I feel like that grime and the snow in combination really create that effect. After over half a year of designing my custom 40k Space Marine chapter, I'm very excited to share with you the ASTRA Primursa. here they are, one Marine and one Captain. My God, I'm glad I went through all of that because now I have a direction I love. Now I'm big on doing something for me and I picked black armor, but I get it. There is something cool and regal and especially special about that cream armor. I actually made a post on my Tabletop Time Instagram. If you don't follow that, do follow it because it's where I share a lot of the work in project of my little projects, especially miniature projects and some behind the scenes at It's Tabletop Time. Basically, I shared the cream and then the black armor and said, what do you like better? And I think most people did pick black, but a good chunk of people picked that cream armor. And I get it. So what I'm gonna do is actually something a lot of you guys suggested in the comments of that post. I'm gonna vary the armor color based on the troops or the character types. So black as the foundation for the basic troops, which I mean, they're still really cool, big, badass troops. But as you get more elite, as you get more grizzly, I'm gonna head into brown armor. Yeah, see where I'm going with this? Little black bears. They charge in and do their thing. Bigger, rougher bears. And the elite bears, chapter master and commanders and super elite troops are gonna have that cream armor. And I do think it will lend it that regality, set them apart from the other squad, and also keep me a little interested. I won't get too bored of just having that one color, and it sort of fits really well in with that bear theme. And then it gives me other things to play with as well. Like my jump pack troops could be more like grays, because they're like koalas or drop bears. But this is so uniquely the army I want to make, and I'm so happy with the results, and I got to the results through that process that I shared with you, and I hope you found that interesting. But again, these are my first two, but they feel complete. There's a bit of Blood Angels in them visually. And there's also a bit of my childhood in them. My family went for a football team that was black and red. They were their team colors. So I just think there's so much like just nostalgia and feelings that I'm just sort of subconsciously channeling into this process, but also an exciting exploration of materials and tools. Check out the sponsor of this video, links in the description, and aesthetics and outcomes that I can be really proud of. I want to make a video soon where I paint the rest of my first squad so I can show you how I do that custom sculpting and the painting process and colors that I use. If you like the idea of that, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please like it so I know you like it. Let me know in the comments that you like it, but most importantly, subscribe. If you want to see more, let me know what you want to see more of and why, and hang around, because this is not only the creative journey of myself and my friends in the miniature hobby, but my gaming group, and we have a lot of fun here. I hope you look forward to future content, and until next time, I'll see you later. Wait, that's the sign off for my main channel. Oh, it's so ingrained in habit by now. I've been doing YouTube for like 10 years. Oh my God, I'm old, but I'm young at heart. Roar.